Okay, we're back. So one thing I didn't mention last time is that Carl Jung kind of feels like the shadow and ideal self are gender locked. Like if you're a man, then you'll have a shadow figure that is masculine usually. And if you're a woman, then you'll have a shadow figure that's feminine usually. And the ideal self is similar. That the ideal self that a man aspires to want to be is someone like Obi-Wan Kenobi. The ideal self for a woman would be, some wise queen or something like that. So that's something to think about in his system. I think maybe it thinks the lines might be a little bit more blurred for us in today's society. And I don't know if that pattern absolutely would 100% hold. But Jung kind of puts all the gender stuff in the anima, the animus figures. But I think if your sexuality was different than heterosexuality, then you might find the lines blurring a little bit more between anima and animus figures. Like the kind of people that you desire might be the same as the kind of person you want to be, or something like that. So just bear in mind that those categories, we might approach them a little bit differently, but that's how Jung would approach them. Okay, let's talk about the persona. You could kind of call the persona an archetype, but you could also kind of call it a pattern going on with archetypes. Basically, Jung notices that we present all these different images of ourselves to other people. So the persona is an image in a dream that represents kind of one of the ways in which we relate to other people. And as we go through life, Jung argues, we present lots of these different selves. For instance, if you're, working in retail, you're going to be presenting yourself as a customer service type person, a salesperson. But then you might present yourself very differently when you're in class as a student. And one thing I learned when I started teaching is that you definitely present yourself in a certain way as a teacher, right? You have certain ways you go about things. You have a way you want to look, a way you want to be, stuff like that. If you have ever, sort of gone back to spend time with your parents, and some of you might be doing that now, you might have noticed that you sort of act like a bit of a different person, or you act in certain ways when you're around them because you to them are in that parent-child relationship. So you're acting out that relationship. Whereas if you were, trying to give a presentation, you might act very differently. And when you're hanging out with your friends, you act very differently too. So for Jung, those are all our sort of different selves that we represent to other people. Not necessarily our real self, but not necessarily fake either, just sort of different aspects of ourself that we put on. And so in dreams, one of the different figures that you might see could be some kind of persona for yourself, like a banker or a warrior or something like that. Various different things could be part of our persona. And for Jung, the big symbol of the persona is the mask. So personas are like masks that we take on and we take off. So if you see masks in dreams, that's a good hint at something to do with personas. So the lines can kind of blur here with the other archetypes a little bit, but yeah, it's worth thinking about, who do we show ourselves to be? That's going to come out in our dreams as well. Okay, so that's the last big archetype type thing, and I believe there should be a worksheet that you can download. I'm going to put that up in the same file as these videos. The persona, the anima / animus, the ideal self, and the shadow. Just a little chart of all of those. Because what Jung basically does with dreams is says, okay, we have a dream. Let's see if we can find those figures in the dream. And once we know those figures, we can maybe understand a little bit more about what the dreamer is going through. Because each one of these different archetypes serves a very specific purpose in someone's subconscious mind. So how would Jung perform Jungian analysis? Jungian is a pretty fun word. Well, let's start with dreams. If Jung's trying to analyze your dreams, you're a patient who's sitting on his psychoanalyst's couch saying, I got all these problems, I got all these weird dreams. And you tell him about your dream. Here's how Jung's going to do it. First, he's going to listen to your dream. Then, the next step in his analysis is to know who the dreamer is. and to have a sense of the dreamer. So he might try and find out a little bit more about you. And just knowing that you are the one dreaming the dream. With a dream, that's pretty easy. With mythology, it gets a little bit more complicated. But usually there's a figure, either you're a character in the dream or there's a figure that you seem most closely connected to in the dream, someone you're following. That would be the dreamer. Okay, so then you have your dreamer. And the other characters in the dream are going to represent these archetypes. So Jung's going to look for the shadow, the ideal self, and the anima and the animus. That's how Jung is going to tackle a dream. And then using all those puzzle pieces, he can put together an idea of what you're going through and what sort of things you need to pay more attention to, what your shadows are trying to tell you or your anima is trying to tell you, and what kind of your ideal self might offer to you, what possibilities it might give to you. So that's how you can determine what a dream means. Now, because Jung believed in the collective unconscious, he believed you could also do that with a myth or a story. Because the myth comes out of our subconscious minds altogether. We thought about how myths kind of generate spontaneously. It's not just one person who comes up with them. So they come from all the different things that are important to us, all the different random feelings that we have. Something comes out of that works for a lot of people on a lot of different levels. So that's how a myth becomes relevant to all sorts of different people. Now, the interesting thing about a myth is that you would have to decide for the myth who is the dreamer in this myth. For instance, I said in the myth of Zeus, maybe Zeus is the dreamer. He's the protagonist, and Gaia is some sort of anima figure who is an enemy to him. In a story, you might decide that one specific character is the dreamer, usually the protagonist, because usually the protagonist is interacting with the world and all the other characters are interacting with them. But you could do the same thing with a story. So for a myth or a story, it would be read the myth, decide on who the dreamer is, decide on which characters are which archetypes, interpret what that means. And then the best part is you could go back and repeat that with a different dreamer. You could pick a different character to be the dreamer and see if that creates a different kind of meaning. So, for instance, you could look at things from Gaia's perspective instead of Zeus's. And, maybe certain things are more important to Gaia than they are to Zeus. I don't know, something like that. So that's how you would analyze a myth. And we'll get into that more next time. But just bear in mind that you can, with these stories, you can look at things from different people's perspectives and kind of psychoanalyze the different characters based on what the other people represent in their minds, which is a pretty cool thing. Okay, so from here I'm going to look at some dreams that are discussed in the Jung's chapter in the book. Just a second here. So one of the discussions that Jung has is a story about a guy who was having some trouble, and he was kind of confused about who he was, and he was working way too hard. So the story goes like this. This is on page 618 of the book if you want to follow along. I owned and inhabited a very big house in town, and I didn't yet know all its different parts. So I took a walk through it and discovered, mainly in the cellar, several rooms about which I knew nothing, and even exits leading into other cellars or into subterranean streets. I felt uneasy when I found that several of these exits were not locked, and some had no locks at all. Moreover, there were some laborers at work in the neighborhood who could have sneaked in. When I came up again to the ground floor, I passed a backyard where again I discovered different exits into the street or into other houses. When I tried to investigate them more closely, a man came up to me laughing loudly and calling out that we were old pals from elementary school. I remembered him too, and while he was telling me about his life, I walked along with him towards the exit and strolled with him through the streets. There was a strange effect in the air as we walked through the enormous circular street and arrived at a green lawn where 3 galloping horses suddenly passed us. They were beautiful, strong animals, wild but well groomed, and they had no rider with them. Had they run away from military service? So that's the dream. And the fun part about this is actually Carl Jung's dream. He's analyzing his own dream here. He doesn't say it in this passage, but other people know that this was actually a dream that he had. So what's going on in Jung's dream? Well, let's think about the different parts here. Who's the dreamer? Okay, we got that. It's Carl Jung, who is a man who is working hard and stressing out a lot. Okay. So what is Jung experience in this dream? What things could sort of stand for archetypes in this dream? Well, first off, the big house is very interesting. A big house with lots of rooms, some of which you don't know anything about. I don't know about you guys, but I kind of feel like this is representing the whole mind right here. So maybe the setting can often represent the mind, and like all the rooms that you don't know anything about, that could be like the subconscious. Um, so Jung is walking through his own mind here. And then who does he meet? Who are some of the characters here? One of them's a man who is an old friend from Jung's elementary school. Um, which one do you think? Which archetype do you think this man could represent? I think probably not an anima figure because he's a man. Um, so very possibly a shadow figure or an ideal self figure. Of those two, I would go with the ideal self because he seems to represent a positive force in this dream. And so if we think about what the ideal self for Jung might be, this ideal self, what is he doing? He's laughing, he's having fun, and he's reminding Jung of all the fun that he had in elementary school. So this is sort of this figure who's saying, you can be happier, you can goof off, you can have a good time. Okay, what else have we got here? Shadow figures. Jung does mention laborers, like he's afraid that workers might sneak into his house, that there might be bad things that can kind of be going on in his mind, maybe, or that people can come into his house and harm him. That's pretty interesting. So that's kind of the closest thing we get here to a shadow figure. But Jung's shadow is kind of just things going on in his mind that he doesn't know about, and sort of rough people. And so that's what Jung is afraid of, is maybe aspects of himself that he doesn't understand or are kind of rough or dangerous. And I guess you could also make an argument for the horses as well. So he meets these horses that are wild. Well, they're beautiful horses, but they're kind of freaking out, and they're strong, and they're galloping away. They're out of control. He says he thinks they were once in control. They were in military service. But now they have no rider, they have no saddles, and they're just running loose. Okay, so what's going on with Jung here? Well, it seems like he's afraid of, he's afraid of his wild instincts and his sort of spontaneous self getting out of control. So he's afraid of not being in control, and that fits pretty well with the portrait of himself that he gave as working hard and worrying a lot. So he's afraid to stop working because he won't be in control. But what he's realizing is that if he recognizes this desire to be active, to follow his passions, his impulses, his instincts, which animals very often represent kind of instincts in these type of dreams. If he follows his instincts, he might have a lot of more fun. And he remembers, this figure from his childhood. So maybe he's trying to process his childhood, and if he follows his instincts more, he will have more childhood fun again and let go of his sort of serious nature. And he won't have to worry about the things that are going on in his mind. Basically, he needs to not work quite so hard, needs to relax and stop worrying so much, and to trust his instincts a little bit better. That's how Jung would analyze his own dream here. He says, this figure probably stands for the dreamer's neglected capacity for enjoying life and for his extroverted shadow side. So maybe his shadow side is also about, getting outside of the house and interacting with other people. Things that are going on outside should come inside. Maybe that's another thing going on in this dream. So you can see how you can work with all these figures and work with these different sort of symbols here. So that's what's going on here in this dream. Okay, let's do one more PowerPoint here and examine a couple more dreams so that we can get the idea here. Okay, see you guys in the next video.